Familiar, Book 9, Divided Chapter 2. Peeling open his eyes as light began to drift into his room, Sonic groaned. Dawn rapidly approached, yet he still couldn't sleep. His mind rampaged throughout the night, fretting over Knuckles, worried he had made the wrong decision for him. His friend's anger had been justified, but would they forgive Knuckles? Would they all be able to move forward, or would Knuckles' worst fears become a reality? If they did, they hated Knuckles. It would be Sonic's fault. Sonic let out a sigh, sitting up and running his hand through his fur, clearing any knots and untangling it from his quills after his night of tossing and turning. Sitting here and fretting over it would do him no good. Best to get started on his day and try to soothe his friend's anger as soon as possible. Not to mention, they had to find his assailant. Sonic had no doubt the cloaked figure had taken his memories, because a hit to the head would leave him with memory shards to find. That was just nonsensical, and he was determined to convince them to restore his past. Slipping out of his room, Sonic entered the eerily quiet main room. Not another soul in sight. Knuckles' door remained shut, and he couldn't see any sign of Amy moving about in her loft above. Sonic pursed his lips, shooting a glance outside as unease settled into his gut. A run would do him some good while he waited for everyone else to emerge. It may be the last string of consistency he still held. The sun had risen high into the sky by the time Sonic resigned himself to returning home. It bore down on him in all its glory, basking the ocean alongside him in a golden, rippling glow. Its heat warmed his back as he ascended the steps, floorboards creaking beneath his feet as he dusted sand from his shoes. The sweet scent of pancakes hit his nose as Sonic slipped inside, inviting a smile to his lips. His face fell when he saw only Tails and Amy in the room, the latter twirling around the kitchen as she spread more batter upon the pan, turning to place a plate stacked high with steaming pancakes in front of Tails. Tails shot her a strained smile, one reciprocated fleetingly, before digging in half-heartedly. Amy turned her eyes meeting his own.
Sonic!
She offered him a bright smile free of much of the previous strain that had tainted it. He could still make out the weariness in her eyes, in the way it dulled down the usual spark that filled them. Tails paused in scarfing down half a pancake to wave at him, flicking flecks of syrup onto the counter from his fork and earning a huff from Amy. Amy stumbled into his gut at her nonchalance, but he offered her a smile regardless, dropping into the seat beside Tails. Should he bring it up, or should he leave the issue for now? Give them a bit more time.
Your pancakes!
Amy placed a plate down in front of him, its soft thunk drawing him from his thoughts.
Thanks,
he said, shooting her a sheepish smile before digging in to avoid her gaze. The sweet syrup bursting on his tongue and trickling down his throat did little to soothe his frets, however. At least they didn't appear to be angry anymore, he supposed. Looking up from his breakfast, he caught Amy's eyes flitting over to Knuckles' door, an indescribable look swirling in their depths, before returning back to flipping another pancake. Not anger, thankfully, but Sonic couldn't make out what she felt. Pursing his lips, he shook away the thoughts to focus on finishing his food. He couldn't gauge her reaction yet, and he had taken a long enough look at Tails for his either. But he hoped the fox would be easier to read. It would benefit him immensely to lose even a little of the stress sitting upon his shoulders.
We're running low!
Amy said. Sonic blinked, pulling himself back to the present and mentally smacking himself for drifting away once more. Amy stood with her head in the fridge door, lips thin as she surveyed the contents, or lack thereof. A container filled with the leftover pancakes sat in the fridge, along with half a block of cheese and some lettuce, the rest of the space itchingly bare. Tails nodded, leaning slightly so he could see around her.
Looks like it!
He turned back to Sonic, eyes bright despite the fatigue that lined them.
We're ready to see a new world.
Sonic gasped, butterflies of excitement bursting free within his stomach and banishing the whisk of concern from his chest.
yes!
Tails laughed at his effervescence, standing and stretching. He moved to take his plate over to the sink when Amy waved him off.
You two go. I'll head up to the orchard and get us more fresh produce in a second.
Tails laughed at his effervescence, standing and stretching. He moved to take his plate over to the sink when Emmy waved him off. She eyed off a fourth plate, fluffy pancakes still steaming atop it, before shooting Knuckles door another.
Oh, leave a note.
She murmured, picking up the plate and storing it away in the microwave. Tension filled the room, murky and thick, and taking away any of the light-hearted bubbles that had been rising up in Sonic's throat. He bit his lip at the sensation, before Tails took his wrist.
Shall we go?
He asked, eyes shimmering with something Sonic couldn't decipher before he was rushed outside, Tails snatching up his satchel from the table by the door as they left.
It's pretty busy on this world, just to warn you,
Tails said, waiting for Sonic's nod of affirmation before he tossed a silver ring through the air. Sonic's eyes widened at the sliver of the world he could see through the portal. People, animals of all kinds, bustled by, and stores of all colors gleamed in the fluorescent light. A euphony of sounds filled his ears as they stepped through the portal, the thumps and clacks of hundreds of shoes, the sizzling of foods upon pans, the all-too-familiar sound of video games booting up. Dozens of scents filled his nose, many savory or sweet, but more that he couldn't place, more that he had never smelled before. Lights danced before his eyes, each store its own rainbow of colors brighter than the previous, determined to outdo those beside them. Sonic jumped when Tails took his hand, grounding him back to the present.
come on.
Tails said, guiding them through the streams of people, weaving between smaller stalls set up selling jewelry or food. He stopped in front of a store glowing a brilliant yellow. Sonic squinted at the neon green writing on the sign announcing its name, but couldn't make it out for the life of him. Between the curly font and the vibrant colors, he couldn't read it.
This is our usual store.
Tails explained, pausing in front to gesture as he spoke.
It's got everything we needed, and it saves time only visiting one store. The one time we tried another shop, we spent the entire day there.
Sonic snorted at the mental image of the two of them fawning over a new type of dessert or meat for hours on end. Tails' eyes widened. Tails shook his head with a smile.
We should keep an eye out for any sharks while we're here. I don't know if there will be any, but we came here a lot.
Sonic nodded. Even if the thought of his memories being scattered across worlds left him uneasy, it couldn't hurt to keep his eyes peeled for the glint of a memory, though.
I'll make sure I do.
They paused by the entrance to pick up a basket each before Tails led them down the first aisle. Sonic's eyes widened comically at all the different foods lining the rows, the packaging a rainbow upon the shelves. Some he could read, but most left him furrowing his brows in confusion until he eyed off the pictures accompanying the foreign words. Sonic followed behind Tails in awe, picking up items when Tails holded them with a hand over his chin, eyeing off specials and comparing prices. Tails passed him an orange packet, little tartlets adorning the front with googly eyes and exaggerated smiles. The item tugged at his memory, but he couldn't recall why. Sonic huffed lightly at his inept brain, turning to Tails quizzically for the answers. Tails smiled.
Is your favorite back before?
Tails made a face, eyes darkening before he turned back to perusing the aisles. Sonic hummed, seeds of worry unfurling in his stomach. But this was the perfect time to talk to Tails regardless of his fears. He could gauge Tails' reaction without having to worry over Knuckles hearing it should it be unpleasant.
So, Tails?
He began, clasping his hands behind his back nonchalantly. Tails hummed, crouching down and plucking a box from the shelves.
How are you feeling?
He asked, rocking back on his heels to disperse the nervous tension running in his gut. Tails sighed, standing up and dropping the box in his basket.
Can we not do this here?
Sonic pursed his lips, wings of anxiety beating in his chest alongside hands of determination. He refused to back down without answers.
Tails, I need to know. You don't hate him, right?
Tails froze, the handle slipping between his fingers, sending the basket clattering to the floor. He turned back to Sonic with wide eyes.
Of course not, I could never hate him.
Sonic let out a sigh of relief, tension falling from his shoulders.
I just...
Tails continued, returning his gaze to the floor.
I can't believe he lied to us for so long. He was hurting for 2 years and he felt like he couldn't trust.
You just trust you.
Sonic reassured him.
It's not really my place to say.
If you know something, you have to tell me, please.
Sonic grimaced. Tails' eyes shone with desperate tears, trying to understand his friend's choices. Maybe Sonic could help him, and Knuckles. Another glance at Tails, and he had made up his mind.
He blamed himself.
He said softly, shooting a glance around the empty aisle as though Knuckles himself would appear, eyes filled with betrayal. He said softly, shooting a glance around the empty aisle as though Knuckles himself would appear, eyes filled with betrayal.
He thought it was his fault that I was taken, and he was worried you two would agree.
Tails' breath hitched at the thought and he shook his head.
I'm sure he tried his best to protect you. We'd never blame him for something like this.
Sonic smiled, patting Tails on the shoulder.
I know. You just need to get him to believe that.
Tails sighed, but nodded. Nodded.
We'll talk to him about it. I just need a bit more time.
Sonic grinned, nerves dissipating. They would be okay. Sonic jumped when Tails threw his hands in the air, face pinched with worry.
I can't believe him. He couldn't sense this. How could he have missed all his pain?
Sonic blinked, tilting his head in confusion. Tails didn't notice, turning his gaze to the floor and thought.
Although, I suppose she did mention his emotions were the most difficult to read, but still.
There they went again with the sensing.
What are you talking about?
He asked. He had given Tails the information he asked for. Surely Tails could return the favor. Tails turned back to him.
Amy's an empath, remember? Oh.
She's an empath.
Sonic asked, ignoring Tails' slip-up. Tails nodded.
Remember how I mentioned that we all had some sort of power? That's hers.
Sonic nodded sagely. It made sense. All her odd comments, how she seemed to be able to read him a little too well. He still had one question, though.
What's your power?
Tails hummed, crouching to pick up the basket from where it had fallen. He turned back to Sonic with a smirk.
That's a surprise.
Sonic gawked at him and Tails only winked, turning around to continue their shopping. He shook his head, rushing to catch up as Tails turned down another aisle.
Not even a hint.
He whined because surely Tails could give him that. Tails pursed his lips in thought.
Nope.
Sonic pouted petulantly, but Tails said no more, so he dropped it. He'd find out soon enough. Of that, he was certain.
Will you talk to Knuckles soon?
Sonic asked after a moment's silence. Tails made a face, comparing two products silently as he thought. He dropped one in his basket before turning to Sonic.
Soon, like I said, I just need a bit of time.
He promised. Sonic nodded.
Good. We wanted to find that mysterious person as soon as possible.
Tails tilted his head, gesturing for Sonic to follow as he continued perusing the items.
What for?
Sonic mentally smacked himself. Naturally, Knuckles had neglected to tell them of their plan, of how the figure had certainly stripped Sonic of his memories.
We believe they have my memories.
Tails' eyes widened and he stopped mid-step.
Do you really think so?
Well, they possess magic, and they wanted to take me away from Knuckles.
He said, pursing his lips at the thought. Pursing.
We could only assume they took my memories since they didn't kill me. If we find them, we can get my memories back and prevent this from happening again.
Tails' eyes shimmered with hope.
We'll get your memories back. We promise now. Wow. We promised Emmy we would stock up. Once we get home, we can plan.
Sonic grinned, nodding enthusiastically. The sooner they had a plan put together, The sooner they could restore his memories. He could only hope Amy and Tails would talk